I spent 50 years believing my own mother didn't want me. That belief shaped every choice I made, including the ones I never dared to make. My name is Lisa, and I'm 58 years old. For half a century, I've carried a question that carved itself deeper into my soul with each passing birthday. Why didn't my mother want me? I was 8 when she left me at St. Catherine's Home for Children, her face stone cold as she walked away without looking back. I pressed my small hands against the window, watching her disappear into a life that apparently had no room for me. The other children whispered that their parents would come back. Mine never did. The other kids had stories about birthday parties and Christmas mornings. I had memories of listening to girls cry themselves to sleep, wondering if anyone would ever choose us. I learned later that my mother, Dorothy, remarried 6 months after leaving me. She had 3 more children, 2 boys and a girl, and from what I could piece together through occasional glimpses around town, she loved them fiercely. She packed their lunches, attended their school plays, held them when they cried. All the things I used to dream she might do for me if I could just be good enough, quiet enough, invisible enough to deserve her love. But what I didn't know then was that some children aren't abandoned, they're saved. But I never was. The question followed me everywhere. During high school graduation, when I sat alone in the auditorium, scanning faces for one that would never come. During my wedding to James, when I realized I didn't even know how to invite her because I didn't know where she lived. When friends talked about their mothers, I learned to smile and change the subject, carrying my mother-shaped hole like a secret wound. I became an expert at avoiding Mother's Day. Every May, I would schedule extra shifts at the library where I worked, surrounding myself with other people's stories to drown out the silence of my own. James learned not to ask why I always volunteered to work holidays, why I flinched when commercials showed mothers and daughters shopping together, why I never wanted to visit the baby section of any store. I made a decision early in my marriage. I would never have children. James wanted them desperately, but how could I explain that the thought of becoming a mother terrified me? What if I turned out like Dorothy? What if some invisible poison ran through my bloodline, making mothers reject their children like damaged goods? I couldn't risk creating another unwanted child, another little girl who would spend her life wondering what she had done wrong. The arguments about children nearly destroyed our marriage. James would hold our friends' babies with such tenderness, his face lighting up in ways that made my chest ache. He never said it directly, but I could see the question in his eyes every time he looked at me. Why won't you trust me enough to build a family together? But how could I tell him that every time I imagined holding a baby, I saw Dorothy's face turning away from mine? The breaking point came on our 5th anniversary. James had made dinner reservations at the restaurant where we had our first date. Halfway through the meal, he pulled out a small wrapped box. For a terrifying moment, I thought it might be another engagement ring, a symbol of starting over, trying again. Instead, it was a pair of tiny baby shoes. I found these at the antique store downtown, he said, his voice careful but hopeful. I thought maybe we could talk about it again, about having a family. I stared at those perfect little white shoes with their miniature laces, and all I could see was myself at 8 years old, standing at the orphanage window with my own worn shoes pressing against the cold glass. I can't, I whispered. Can't or won't. The question hung between us like a blade. How could I explain that motherhood felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing I might turn into the same cold woman who had thrown me away? How could I tell him that every time I held a baby, I felt Dorothy's rejection echoing in my bones? But I was about to learn that some mothers don't abandon their children. They save them from becoming like themselves. Some nights, I would lie awake constructing elaborate fantasies about why Dorothy had given me away. Maybe she was protecting me from something terrible. Maybe she was sick and didn't want me to watch her suffer. Maybe she loved me so much that letting me go was her greatest sacrifice. But then I would remember her face that last day, not sad, not torn apart by impossible choices, just cold, empty, like looking at a stranger she'd never cared about at all. The hatred grew slowly at first, then consumed me like wildfire. I started driving past her house when I turned 30. It became a ritual I couldn't stop, even though it left me shaking every time. I would park across the street and watch her other children play in the yard she had never let me enter. The daughter looked nothing like me, blonde where I was dark, delicate where I was strong. Maybe that made it easier for Dorothy to love her. By my 40s, I could barely say her name without my chest tightening. Dorothy had stolen my childhood, my ability to trust, my chance at motherhood. She had condemned me to a lifetime of feeling fundamentally unlovable. When I learned she had died 10 years ago, I felt nothing but relief that she could never hurt me again. I thought her death would end the questions, but instead it amplified them. Now I would never get answers, never understand why I wasn't enough. The finality of it felt like being abandoned all over again. Yesterday changed everything. I was leaving the grocery store when I heard my name called in a voice I almost recognized. Turning around, I saw an elderly woman with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a familiar bun. Lisa? Lisa Williams? From St. Catherine's? My breath caught. Mrs. Rodriguez. She had been my favorite teacher at the home, the one person who made me feel like I mattered. Now 83 and moving slowly with a walker, she looked at me with the same warm smile I remembered from my loneliest days. I never forgot you, sweetheart. You were such a bright little thing. How did your life turn out? We talked for nearly an hour in the parking lot, catching up on 5 decades. I told her about my marriage to James, my career as a librarian, the quiet life we had built together. But eventually, the old question surfaced like it always did. Mrs. Rodriguez, do you remember anything about my mother? About why she left me there? The teacher's face grew heavy with something that looked like relief mixed with sorrow. She glanced around the parking lot as if checking whether anyone could overhear us. Oh, honey, I've thought about this for years, wondering if I should have tried to find you. Your mother? Dorothy. She was just a child herself when she had you. Barely 17. That doesn't excuse. Let me finish, sweetheart. There's something you need to know. Mrs. Rodriguez reached out and took my hand in both of hers. Her skin was paper thin but warm, and suddenly I was 8 years old again, desperate for someone to tell me I mattered. Your mother didn't get pregnant by choice, Lisa. Her older brother, your uncle, he hurt her when she was 16. The family threw her out when they discovered she was expecting, said she had brought shame on them. The world tilted sideways. I felt like I was falling even though I was standing perfectly still. But this was only the beginning of what Mrs. Rodriguez had to tell me. She was homeless when you were born, living under a bridge downtown, delivering you alone in a cardboard box behind the old Woolworths. A police officer found you both and brought you to the emergency room. My legs felt weak. I gripped the edge of her walker. For 8 years, she tried to be your mother while living in shelters, working cleaning jobs for almost nothing. She was just a broken girl raising a child while battling demons no one should face alone. Some days, she couldn't even look at you without crying. Other days, she would hold you so tight, I thought she might never let go. But she had other children later. She loved them. Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes filled with tears. By then, she had gotten help, found healing, built a stable life with a good man who adopted those children and gave them his name. But Lisa, her voice dropped to almost a whisper. Every time she looked at you, she saw her brother's face. She saw the worst night of her life. She told me once that she knew you deserved better than a mother who flinched every time you smiled. I couldn't breathe. The parking lot around us seemed to blur at the edges. She didn't give you away because she didn't love you. She gave you away because she thought someone else could love you better than she ever could. She said it was the hardest thing she ever did, but she wanted you to have a chance at happiness. Mrs. Rodriguez squeezed my hands tighter. She asked me to watch over you, to make sure you knew you were special. I tried, sweetheart. I hope I tried hard enough. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember telling James what I had learned or falling asleep that night with tears soaking my pillow. But I remember waking up the next morning with a strange sense of clarity, as if someone had adjusted the lens through which I saw my entire life. I had spent 50 years hating a girl who was broken long before I was born. Dorothy's grave was in a small cemetery on the outskirts of town, marked with a simple headstone that read, "Beloved Mother and Wife." I knelt in the grass beside it, feeling the weight of decades pressing down on my shoulders. "I forgive you," I whispered to the stone. "I forgive you for not being able to love me. I forgive you for giving me away. I forgive you for being human." The words felt foreign in my mouth, like speaking a language I had never learned. "I understand now that you were just a child trying to survive something terrible. I understand that sometimes love looks like letting go." I traced the letters of her name with my finger, wondering if she had ever thought about me in her final moments. Had she wondered if I was happy? Had she worried that I hated her? Had she hoped I would understand someday? A warm breeze moved through the cemetery, rustling the leaves of the oak tree above her grave. For the first time in 50 years, the question that had tormented me was answered. Not with the fairy tale ending I had once dreamed of, but with something more complicated and somehow more real. But even as I felt peace settling over me, one question remained unanswered. Dorothy had been a victim long before she became my mother. As I drove home, something shifted inside my chest. The anger I had carried like armor for decades began to crack and fall away. In its place, I felt something I hadn't expected, a deep, aching sadness for the girl who had been forced to choose between her sanity and her daughter. But as I pulled into my driveway, one thought kept nagging at the edges of my newfound peace. Had I forgiven her because it was right, or simply because I needed to stop carrying the weight of hating her?